So this lecture covers the basics of outlining and organization, which is what you'll continue to work on this week. However, it also covers kind of the overall structure of your paper in terms of organizing between and within paragraphs. You might not be writing in paragraphs just yet, but you will be in the next few weeks, and it will make it easier for you if you incorporate this information into your outline during the outlining stage as opposed to waiting until you're actually writing. So when we talk about our organization, there's several different levels. There's the global organization. How are you organizing the main points, the main arguments of your paper, which one goes first, etc. There's the sectional organization, which has to do with what order the sections go in, introduction first, then method and results, and what subsections go within those. And then there's the local organization, which has to do with how you organize your paragraphs and sentences. So we're going to start with kind of how do you organize your ideas. And so we want to group our ideas based on how to go together and figure out how different ideas relate. You started to do this last week with the synthesizing sources assignment. One other way, so a next step that you might try is an idea map. So an idea map might look something like this, where you're writing down all of the kind of key points or key ideas that you want to make, and you're trying to figure out how do they fit together, and drawing lines to make connections. Some people are more kind of visual thinkers and find this very appealing. Other people do not like this. They might be more linear thinkers and do not like this strategy. This can be a good way if you're really struggling to figure out connections between ideas. However, an outline, which is what we're going to do for this week, is a little bit more like the paragraph form that your paper is also going to end up in, and it also is easier to include sources. So we're going to focus more on the outline strategy to organize your ideas, starting out with broad categories and then figuring out what evidence fits where. So with an outline, it's essentially outlining the main ideas and paragraphs in your essay. And you start out generally with the categories. Figure out where the evidence fits. What are the key ideas? You want to outline kind of your introduction. You want to make sure you have that thesis statement in there. And then you're going to outline where your categories or where your arguments fit in. Okay, so what is your strongest argument? Which argument are you going to, or which section are you going to present first? And then how are you going to organize the rest of them? But within the section, you also need to think about outlining down to the paragraph level. And this is one of those places where the more effort you put into the outline, the more detailed outline you have, the easier it is to write. Because if you've done the work at this stage, then you should essentially have your paragraphs laid out, and all you have to do is kind of add in a few sentences. So as you're kind of figuring out within each section what paragraphs you want to write, you want to think about, you don't just want to list random facts, you want to think about how they fit together. So what is the main idea of this paragraph? How does the main idea address my thesis? How does this paragraph strengthen my argument? And is there evidence to support the idea? So if, for example, I'm going to go back to this example that I used previously about whether parents influence academic development, and my three main arguments are going to be that parents influence it through attachment, and through environmental stimuli, and through genetics via IQ or via intelligence. So those are going to be the three main sections or ideas in my paper. So if I'm going to look at, for example, attachment, I want to think about within attachment, what exactly do I want to say? I don't just want to randomly be talking about articles. I want to have a clear argument that I'm going to make. I want to talk about how the child's attachment and use of a secure base helps them explore the world, and that might improve their cognitive or academic development. So maybe I have one paragraph about secure base. Maybe I have another paragraph about how secure attachment influences positive peer relationships. And so I'm going to have a paragraph just about what we know about peer relationships. So I'm not just listing all of the articles and organizing my paragraphs on the articles. I really want to get down and think about what is the main idea, or what are the themes that I can talk about, and how can I break them into paragraphs. And again, this is hard work and hard thinking, but the more time you do it now, the easier it is when you sit down to actually write. So this is an example, this is an example from a paper that I published several years ago now. And so if this were the beginning of an outline, I would start with my thesis and kind of think about the subpoints that I want to make. This on its own is not enough, and this is definitely not an outline, right? So if my thesis is health beliefs about breast cancer can increase the likelihood that women will get a mammogram, that's the argument that I'm going to make. And I want to talk about 3 different types of health beliefs. I want to talk about perceived risk, expected prognosis, and the benefits versus barriers to getting a mammogram. Now, this isn't enough. I couldn't write a paper just on this. This doesn't tell me where each of my sources fits in. I need to kind of add to this and add my evidence and figure out, okay, I've got some basic sections here, but how does my evidence fit in, and how am I going to organize it into paragraphs? Like I said, this comes from a publication I did with a student, Santana Van Dyke, and here we had kind of clearly laid out the arguments that we're going to make in each section, and we've also laid out the support for arguments to make sure that we don't plagiarize. We've got the ideas that we wanted to include and our citations for them. So we've got a general introduction, some basic facts about breast cancer screenings and effectiveness, and I've got citations for them. I end my introduction with a thesis statement, and then I have each of the sections I had laid out in the previous slide, but for each section I've got it kind of broken down. So at the letter level, under the health belief model and the perceived susceptibility, these are essentially paragraphs, and so I've kind of laid out what I'm going to say in these paragraphs. And so I have my citations that are included there. If I need to refer back to them, I can, but I have kind of the clear idea of what I want to write and who I'm going to cite for that. So writing from this is going to be much easier than trying to thumb through a million articles and figuring out what I'm going to say. And this is just the rest of the outline. And so I posted an example for you to look at. So we talked about paragraphs, right? Each of your paragraphs should be about 4 to 6 sentences. In the paragraph level organization, you should have a topic sentence. So your topic sentence should hook to the previous paragraph, repeat a word, tie in a thought, have a transition word, and should be broad enough to be to cover the whole paragraph. So it's a topic sentence. The body is going to be the bulk of the evidence that you have to fill in the details. And then the end sentence in a paragraph is going to restate your argument and, very importantly, ties the argument back to your thesis statement. So that end sentence should answer the question, why is this paper or this paragraph relevant to the overall picture of your paper? To practice these paragraph level writing skills, which hopefully you've been doing since we talked about this at the beginning of the term, I'd like you to pause this and write a 4 to 6 sentence paragraph about something, a fun experience, a favorite food you had, whatever. But what I want you to do is pay special attention to how you write the topic sentence, make sure it's broad enough to cover your entire paragraph, fill it in with some relevant details or supporting arguments, and then write a concluding end sentence that wraps it up and makes your point. And as you are doing this, you should be doing this for every paragraph you write. So as you begin to really write your paper, be very conscientious about this. This is in the grading rubric, so this is something that I look for. Okay, moving on to the larger structure of the essay. Just like a paragraph, your essay will have a beginning, middle, and end. And so the beginning paragraphs of your essay should generally be in a funnel format. So you start with a broad invitation or a broad introduction, and it culminates in your thesis. So you should try to keep your introduction to 1 paragraph. And that paragraph, the last sentence of your paragraph, should be your thesis statement. So we're going from broad to narrow here. Students often struggle with where to start. And if you're not sure where to start, often kind of the goal here is to provide some basic definitions and kind of a rationale for how the things in your thesis are related. And so one of the best things to do is pick one of the things in your thesis, a word from your thesis and start talking about it. Say something about it. And then 3 to 4 sentences later, hopefully you kind of tie it back into that whole thesis statement. The middle paragraphs of your essay should, as we said before, essentially be mini essays. They need beginning sentences, middle sentences, and end sentences. They should flow smoothly and cover everything in the topic sentence. They should be full and well developed with details, examples, explanations, and citations. And make sure that you have transitions in there. So you want to make sure that you're hooking your paragraph to your previous one. But if you have a couple of different ideas in one paragraph and you've covered it all in your topic sentence, give some transition, right? If you're going to talk about 2 different things, the first one you identify as first, or one potential way this might influence it is, and then when you start talking about the second topic, a second way it might influence it. So using those transitions to help your reader see how the different ideas fit together. It's a really important tool. So the end paragraph for your entire essay should be a conclusion of some kind. You want to start by reasserting your thesis. So the first sentence of that last paragraph should be rephrasing your thesis. And then you want to summarize. Now, the trick is you want to summarize without completely repeating everything you just said. And you also want to add in some takeaway points. So I recommend, and we'll do this later, once you've written your whole paper, I encourage you to go back to the free writing skills we learned in the beginning of the class and do a free write for your conclusions. Put your paper away and just write for 5-10 minutes about what your paper was about and the bigger picture you want your reader to take away. And this can be a really effective way of figuring out what kinds of conclusions you want to make. So the overall structure of your paper should look like a keyhole, where you start with an open invitation in that first paragraph, going from broad to narrow, ending with your thesis. The middle paragraphs are going to be presenting that evidence and making your arguments. You want to make sure that you have citations and those evidence in there. You want to make sure that each of your middle paragraphs is a standard paragraph that has a topic and an ending sentence. And then in your end paragraphs, you're going to start with a reworded thesis and then generalize to the end. So that is some thoughts on how to structure both paragraphs and your paper as a whole and how to make outlines.